So let me welcome you. I'm Harry Forbes from ARC. Welcome you to this session entitled Open Process Automation Status. We have a good program, I think, this afternoon. I think you'll find it interesting. A couple of sort of unpublicized, unannounced things. So let me just kind of go over what's going to be happening in this session. First of all, well, I'll say a few things very briefly. And then I'm going to be followed by an unannounced short announcement by Don Bartusiak of ExxonMobil. And Don is just going to kind of tee up the session that the Open Group is conducting here on Thursday and give a very, very brief status update on the Open Process Automation Foundation, just to kind of whet your appetite for staying here through Thursday morning, which I think you all should. And then that will be followed by David DeBerry of ExxonMobil, who's going to present an update on their proof of concept and pilot programs, which are underway now. And then he will be followed by Igor Stolz of Evonik. And Igor has been involved in the MTP pilots that Evonik has done with a number of other suppliers. And maybe I'll take just a second to explain that MTP is a NAMUR initiative. MTP stands for Module Type Package, if you're not familiar with it. It's a technology for extremely rapid integration of systems, skid-mounted systems, but also process equipment or modular plants. So Igor will explain more about it, but it is NAMUR and the Open Process Automation Foundation are collaborating in their efforts and trying to coordinate them. So MTP is an important part of the overall open automation architecture. Finally, as a second unannounced surprise, we will have a very brief presentation from Guhan Prabhu of Aramco US, just to update us very briefly on their status and what's going on there. We don't have as much information on that as we were hoping. We invited some folks from the kingdom, but unfortunately they could not come. So that's what's on tap here today. In the next session, we'll have a panel discussion. So if we don't have time for Q&A, we can have some Q&A as well during the panel discussion. So let me start with, I have 4 slides and there are 4 thoughts, okay? There are 4 things that struck me in the last year about disruption in general and about, it seemed to me that these applied to our initiatives for open process automation. The first one is this little quote from the afterword of this book called Flash Boys, which was about financial markets. And what happened to the financial markets was they were taken over by high-frequency trading firms. And this company tried to restructure and make a market that would work for the people who are trading instead of for the high-potential or high-frequency traders. And what he said, you can read it, he says, but anyone who stands up and says the way things are being done here is totally insane, here's why it's insane, and here's a better way to do it, is going to incur wrath because sometimes the folks who are established stand accused of creating the insanity. And I think that's an important thing for us all to remember, is that as an automation supplier, which I have probably spent almost as much, more than half of my career in that role, you really are in business and you respond to the demands of your customers, the available technologies, and the business incentives that you have. So it's an important concept not to attribute evil motives to people because of the situation that you find yourself, even if you don't like it. The second is my familiar rant that software is eating the world, and it is cloud software, which means it's orchestrated, containerized software. And this is my rant all the time. I'm happy to talk to anybody about that. But that vision remains intact as far as I'm concerned, although the deployment date for it and the time when it catches up and starts eating the embedded world is open to question. This is an area we're looking at very closely in ARC. Third point of 4, and this is a quote that Michael Dell had at his meeting, and I thought it's a nice observation. The cloud is not a place, it is an operating model. Well, I think that's true. In a way, the cloud is either a place and an operating model. It's both. But the key point here is that when you think about cloud software, think about it not just as AWS or Google. Think of it as an operating model for developing and deploying software. And that, in that case, it kind of changes the argument. So that's a facet of cloud or cloud native that I think we need to keep in mind, that it's an operating model. And fourth of four is this. This was a quote from the co-chair of the Kubernetes Architecture Special Interest Group, which sounds a little obscure. But Kubernetes is the de facto standard for orchestrating containers in data centers and in corporate data centers and cloud data centers. And he wasn't thinking about control, but what he said is that their system, a distributed information processing system, can now be described as an unbounded number of independent asynchronous control loops reading from and writing to a schematized resource store as the source of truth. And he said this model has proven to be resilient, evolvable, and extensible. Well, he's talking about cloud software. He's not talking about process control. But the interesting thing is they find this, they look at their orchestration piece as something that's managing a real-time system, a deployment where people can come and interact with it at scale over a long period of time. So in my vision, I think that eventually this type of solution will end up managing and orchestrating a lot of our production processes in the long run. So those are my four thoughts. So thank you for listening to those. And now what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring up Don Bartusiak from ExxonMobil just to give us a brief update on what the Open Process Automation Forum has been doing and what to expect from them Thursday morning and in the future. Don?